Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, in today's video, we're going to go through the definition of grammar from a classical book. I'm going to read to you the definition in Arabic, explain to you the parts of the definition so you get a very clear, crystal clear understanding of what grammar is. And I'm going to reveal to you the two problems that grammar is there to solve, which would then bring us into a discussion of what a sentence is. Because there's really just two problems that a student can have, comprehension issues. If you know what those problems are and you know what their solution is, then this goes a long way in giving you clarity so that you have relative importance. Whatever you're studying, you will know exactly how important it is, how it plays a role, and how it will move you forward in being able to properly understand the Quran and the Sunnah and the books of the scholars on your own. And then once I'm done all of that, then we're going to move into a Quranic example, a verse in Surah Al-Ma'idah that has an extremely lengthy maf'ul bihi, an object of a verb that's 18 words together connecting in numerous phrases. So we're talking about deep nesting, prepositional phrases and relative clauses, and how that plays a role, and how understanding the grammar helps you in being able to appreciate properly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in the ayah. Okay, so the author of the Hidayat al-Nahw book, he says, النحو علم بأصول يعرف بها أحوال أواخر الكلم الثلاث من حيث الإعراب والبناء. The Nahw is the science of classical Arabic that gives you principles through which are recognized A and B. So straight away he's telling you that there's two core issues. That's it, there's two core issues. And if you understand those two issues and their solutions, then that is all of grammar. يعرف بها, through which are recognized A. أحوال أواخر الكلم الثلاث من حيث الإعراب والبناء, and B. وكيفية تركيب بعضها مع بعض. The circumstances of the last letters of the three parts of speech from the perspective of whether they change or don't change. من حيث الإعراب والبناء. Because any word you come across in a sentence, any word you come across in a sentence, whether it be the word Zayd, or whether it be the word al-bayt, or it be something like hadihi, or it be a ma, whatever word you come across from the three parts of speech, it will have a last letter. There's no word that doesn't have a last letter. So now the last letter of the word you have in front of you, I'm not saying noun, I'm saying word. The last letter of the word you have in front of you, is it grammatically significant, or is it just fixed? You need to know this. You need to know whether the last letter of the word you have in front of you is telling you something about the role of the word, or whether it's just fixed. Because if you misunderstand a fixed word, like hadihi ends in a kasra. Hadihi ends in a kasra. So when hadihi comes in a sentence as the subject of the verb, you say hadihi asnamun, these are idols. Or ja'at hadihi, this woman came. When it's the object, it's still hadihi, ra'aytu hadihi. And when it follows the proposition, it's still hadihi. So if they ask you, why does hadihi end in a kasra in the example marartu bihadihi al-mar'ati, and somebody asks you, why does hadihi end in a kasra in the example marartu bihadihi al-mar'ati, and you say incorrectly because ba caused that kasra on hadihi, then this is wrong. Okay, because hadihi's kasra is fixed. The correct answer is because that's the way it's built. So to recognize about the three parts of speech, which ones have fluctuating endings and which ones have fixed endings, is important. Okay, now once you've divided the words into the ones that have fluctuating endings called mu'rab and the ones that have fixed endings called mabni, when it's fluctuating, then you need to know what that ending is representing. What's the meaning that's being generated by that ending? So every word will have a circumstance. Okay, every word you come across in a sentence will have an ending, and that ending will either be fixed, it will be fluctuating. If it's fluctuating, then you need to understand the mechanism. The roles of the nouns are 22. There's 22 ways an ism could be used in the Arabic language, but the changes are just 3. So how do you square that? Okay, so the $1 million question is that if the noun in the Arabic language could be used in 22 different ways, then why do we only have 3 different endings? Why not 22 endings, right? So this is what grammar is all about. Okay, so in the definition, he's saying Nahw is the science of classical Arabic that gives you principles through which are recognized, number one, the circumstances of the last letters of the three parts of speech from the perspective of whether they experience grammatical change or whether they don't. من حيث الإعراب والبناء. And then he says, وَكَيْفِيَّةُ تَرْكِيبِ بَعْضِهَا مَعَ بَعْضٍ, and the sanctioned methods of joining words together. That's it. Because when you take two or more words and connect them together in a way that does not result in a full sentence, then that's what we mean when we say phrase. So Kitabu Zaydin is an example of a phrase. Waladun Rashidun is an example of a phrase. Ar-Rasulul A'zamu, the greatest messenger. That's an example of a phrase. So there's about 12 to 16 ways in which words can be connected together in order to create phrase level relationships. And what's common between all of them is they give you more than what you started off with. So in the example, Kitabu Zaydin, the total number of words are two. There's the word kitab, which means book. And then there's Zayd, which is the name of an individual. And then there's a third meaning, that's ownership and possession. So if they ask you where did that come from, the correct answer is it came from the structure. More specifically, it came from the word kitab, not having an al, and also not having a second dhamma. So it's just kitabu and no tanween. And Zayd having the very specific ending that it has, kitabu Zaydin, as opposed to any other ending that was possible. So when those requirements are satisfied, then it will give you ownership and possession. So understand the mechanism that differentiates between the roles of the nouns, that's one half of grammar, and to be able to appreciate the phrase level relationships anywhere between 12 and 16 ways in which words can connect together, depending on how you categorize. That's the other half. That's it. That's all of grammar. So what is a sentence? A sentence is al-kalamu lafdun تضمن كلمتين بالإسناد. Kalam is a group of words that contains a subject-predicate relationship. So what is a subject-predicate relationship? He says نسبة إحدى الكلمتين إلى الأخرى بحيث تفيد المخاطب فائدة تامة يصح السكوت عليها. When two or more words are arranged and connected together in a way that communicates to the audience a complete benefit upon which silence is appropriate. So once you're done speaking your two or more words, you become quiet. And then one of two things will happen. Either the audience, the person listening to you, will be completely satisfied, in which case you spoke a sentence. And if that's not what's happening and they're still waiting for you to finish it, then that means what you spoke is a phrase. So now, every sentence has two halves. One of them is called the subject and one of them is called the predicate. The subject is the thing you talk about. So Zayd is standing. So the word Zayd would be the subject and standing would be the predicate. Now, the subject must be a noun or a pronoun. The subject cannot be a verb. It can't be a verb. It can't be an adjective, what the English people call an adjective. It can't be a prepositional phrase. It must be an entity or a concept or a noun. Now, in English, regardless of the other part, the descriptive part of the sentence, the predicate, the subject will always be at the front. So I can give you 5 examples. Zayd is a human. Zayd is tall. Zayd is in the masjid. Zayd went. Zayd hit Amr. So in all 5 of those examples, the commonality is that regardless of the predicate, Zayd is at the front. In all 5 examples. If I were to render those 5 examples into Arabic, then in 3 of them, Zayd would be at the front. And 2 of them, the order would change and the verb would be at the front. So here they are. Zaydun insanun. That's the first example. Zaydun tawilun. That's the second example. Zaydun fil masjidi. That's the third example. And then I say Zayd went, dhahaba Zaydun. So automatically what happened was that the verb was brought at the front and Zayd got pushed forward. Daraba Zaydun amran is the 5th example. Zayd hit Amr. So over there again, the verb is at the front and Zayd gets pushed forward. So what we're seeing here is that fundamentally there's a difference between English and Arabic. In English, there's only one kind of sentence because the noun is always at the front. So whatever happens with the predicate, it doesn't affect the arrangement. But in Arabic, that's not true. In Arabic, you can have sentences that don't have verbs, like the first 3 examples. The minute you choose to use a verb, it changes, and the verb ends up starting the sentence, and the subject of the verb would need to come second, and that's how the meaning is communicated. So is this important? So the grammar scholars, they recognize this, and they said it's incredibly important to the point that it deserves its own classification. So they came up with 2 kinds of sentences. One of them is called the Jumla Ismiya, and the other one is called the Jumla Fi'liya. So when the noun is at the front, that kind of sentence is called Jumla Ismiya. and the two halves of the nominal sentence have names. They are called mubtada and khabar. So what is a mubtada? A mubtada is the primary part of the nominal sentence. The khabar would be the descriptive part of the nominal sentence, and generally they're in that order. The mubtada is first and the khabar is second. In the verbal sentence, dhahaba Zaydun, Zayd went, first of all the order changes, and the descriptive part, which in English is what we would call a predicate, is actually the verb itself. And the terms we use to describe the components of the verbal sentence are fi'l and fa'il. And depending on the number of details, you can have more. Verbal sentences don't have to stop at two. There could be a third portion, like Zayd hit Amr, that Amr word there. We call it a direct object. In Arabic, it's called a maf'ul bihi. Okay, so far so good? Now, if the verbal sentence is simple and it's just two words, like dhahaba Zaydun, then there's no comprehension issue to solve. If somebody tells you what the meaning of dhahaba is and what the meaning of Zayd is, then grammar does not play a role. The translation is done. It's like Zayd went. The meaning is complete and there's nothing to analyze. However, verbs do not just have doers. Depending on the meaning of a verb, you can have an object. So sitting and standing do not have objects, but eating and drinking do. So for eating, you would expect there to be food, and for drinking, you would expect there to be a beverage, for example. And then there could also be additional details that the speaker may choose to communicate. So it all depends on how much meaning the speaker is choosing to disclose. So there could be a when, a where, a why, and a how. So when those additional details are added, they would be added after. So the verb would be at the front, and then after the verb, you could conceivably have 4 or 5 isms, 4 or 5 nouns, and then you can have other things as well. So now it becomes an issue of differentiating and being able to tell which of the nouns is the one doing the verb, and which of the nouns is the one upon whom the verb is being done. So this in Arabic is done through case endings. So the one who's the fa'il, the doer, would have a dhamma generally in order to reflect that, and the object would have a fatha in order to reflect that. So now you can switch it around and you could put the object first and delay the subject, and the meaning is still clear. Even though sequence is not determining grammar, there's no confusion, because we know that the word with the dhamma is automatically the subject and the word with the fatha is automatically the object. So this is how verbal sentences are dealt with. In a nominal sentence, if it's just two words, then again grammar does not play a role. You say something like Zaydun jalisun, Zayd is sitting. So over here the word Zayd has to be the mubtada and the word jalis has to be the khabar, because there's no other option. The only thing you'd have to pay attention to is that the two are not connecting together and forming a phrase. But that's easily distinguishable. So assuming you know that, there's no further grammatical issue to solve in a two-word nominal sentence. But if the nominal sentence becomes long, say 10 words, then some of those words would together connect and form the subject, and some of them would connect and form the object. Now in English this is not a problem. The reason is because English has a particular verb, the verb to be, that is represented with the word is, and all of the words on one side of the is would be the subject and the rest of the words would be the object, and is serves as a wall and it creates a division between the two halves of the sentence. Arabic doesn't have an is in a basic nominal sentence. So if I wanted to say this masjid which Ishaq alayhi salatu wasalam built in Sham is Baytul Maqdis, in English you have no trouble knowing the meaning of that sentence because the word is divided it. In Arabic it would be هذا المسجد الذي بناه إسحاق في الشام بيت المقدس. So how do I know? What's the division? There's 10 words there. So is it two and everything else becomes the predicate, or is it one on its own and everything else becomes the predicate? How do we know from where to where is the subject and where to where is the predicate? The answer is that you'd have to go into your inventory of phrase level relationships and move from right to left and look at 2 words at a time and see whether there's any connection. And the minute the phrase level relationships exhaust, that's when you know the predicate begins. So هذا المسجد الذي. So is it conceivable that هذا on its own could be the mubtada? And the answer is no, because al-masjid has an al, and whenever هذا is followed by a noun that's specifically definite with an al, then the two together form a phrase. So that means that predicate can't start. And then when we see the alladhi, we know that it's still ongoing and the predicate cannot begin. And alladhi is what we call the ism mawsul, and every mawsul must be followed by a sila, a relative clause, and that relative clause will be a full sentence in and of itself. So now we have a bunch of components that need to occur, and only after they're all there is it conceivable that the predicate can begin. So we say banahu ishaqu fi shami, and then we have baytu with the dhamma. So it would be on the word sham. All of the words up until the word sham would be the first half of the sentence, and the word baytul maqdis, those two words on their own at the end, would be the predicate, and there's no is, and yet it's not a problem. So this is what it is. So this is what grammar is all about. And I think I'll stop it here, and inshallah in the next video we'll go through the Quranic example that I said I'll go through. And if you want that, post in the comments and let me know, and inshallah I'll have it ready for you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.